My father worked 43 years at the same company. He arrived early, he stayed late, he received promotions, he did everything correctly according to the rules he was taught. When he retired, he had a modest pension and a house with a remaining mortgage balance that would take another decade to clear. He wasn't lazy, he wasn't foolish. He followed the path that society promised would lead to security and prosperity. Get educated, get a good job, work hard, save what you can, retire with dignity. The path delivered some of what it promised: stability, respectability, a life better than poverty. But it didn't deliver wealth. It didn't deliver freedom. It didn't deliver the ability to stop working because he wanted to rather than because his body forced him to. Watching this taught me something that no classroom ever mentioned. The rules my father followed weren't designed to make him wealthy. They were designed to make him useful. Useful to employers, useful to banks, useful to a system that needs reliable workers more than it needs financially independent people. The middle class exists in a specific economic position that feels comfortable enough to discourage risk, but constrained enough to prevent escape. This position isn't accidental, it's structural. The patterns that keep people in this position repeat across generations because the knowledge needed to break them isn't taught in the places where most people learn. Today, I'm going to tell you what I wish someone had told my father when he was young, why the middle-class path doesn't lead to wealth, what wealthy people understand that everyone else doesn't, and how anyone, regardless of starting point, can begin building something different than the comfortable trap that captures most people. This isn't about looking down on honest work or stable careers. My father's work had dignity and meaning. But dignity doesn't pay for freedom, and the rules he followed ensured that freedom would always remain just out of reach. You deserve to know those rules and how to transcend them, and financial literacy isn't optional knowledge that only business people need. It's essential understanding that affects every single day of your life. Money touches everything. The food you eat requires money. The home you live in requires money. The healthcare that keeps you alive requires money. The education you provide your children requires money. Supporting aging parents requires money. Every relationship, every decision, every opportunity is shaped by financial reality. Yet most people navigate this omnipresent force without any formal understanding of how it actually works. They learn to earn money through labor. They learn to spend money through consumption. But they never learn how money itself operates as a tool that can be directed, multiplied, and made to work independently. Imagine driving a car without understanding how brakes work. You could probably survive. You could get from place to place most of the time, but the moment conditions became challenging, your ignorance would become dangerous. Financial ignorance operates the same way. During smooth conditions, it creates only minor inefficiencies. During challenging conditions, it creates catastrophe. The challenging conditions always arrive eventually. Job loss, medical emergency, economic downturn, family crisis. The financially literate navigate these moments with resources and options. The financially illiterate face them with only desperation and debt. Financial literacy isn't about becoming obsessed with money or defining yourself through wealth. It's about understanding the terrain you inhabit, whether you want to or not. The force that shapes your options deserves understanding regardless of your values or priorities. Traditional education systematically fails to provide this essential understanding. Think about what schools actually teach. Mathematics, literature, science, history, social studies, physical education, sometimes art or music. Students spend 12 or more years learning subjects selected by curriculum designers who decided what knowledge matters. Financial literacy rarely appears on that list. Students graduate high school able to analyze Shakespeare and solve quadratic equations, but unable to understand a credit card statement or evaluate a mortgage offer. They can explain photosynthesis, but not compound interest. They know when the Battle of Hastings occurred, but not how tax brackets work. Higher education continues this pattern. Professional schools train doctors, lawyers, and engineers in technical expertise. Graduate programs develop specialized knowledge. Students accumulate credentials that signal competence in their fields, but the ability to manage the income those credentials generate, left entirely to individual discovery. The physician earning $400,000 annually and the fast food worker earning $25,000 receive identical formal financial education, which is to say, almost none. This omission isn't random oversight. The education system was designed to produce employees, not entrepreneurs, workers, not owners, people who exchange time for money, not people who make money work for them. The skills that enable employment differ from the skills that enable wealth. Employment requires technical competence, reliability, and ability to follow direction. Wealth requires understanding of assets, leverage, and value creation. Schools optimize for the first set of skills because that's what the system needs most people to have. I'm not suggesting conspiracy, I'm observing function. The system produces what it was designed to produce. If it were designed to create financially independent people, it would teach financial independence. It doesn't because it wasn't. This means the financial education you need must come from somewhere outside traditional schooling. From books, from mentors, from experience, from conscious effort to learn what institutions don't teach. The absence of this effort produces the middle-class outcome. People who know how to work but not how to build wealth. People whose education prepared them for employment but not for independence. Understanding a crucial distinction separates those who build wealth from those who only earn income. Wealth comes from understanding money, not just from working hard. This statement challenges deeply held beliefs. Most people were raised to believe that hard work leads to financial success. That effort correlates with outcome, that the diligent rise while the lazy fall. This belief contains partial truth. Hard work is often necessary. The lazy rarely build anything. Effort matters, but effort applied without understanding produces limited results. The hardest working person in the factory doesn't become wealthy from that labor. They become tired. They become reliable. They become valuable to whoever owns the factory. But they don't become wealthy because their effort creates value that flows primarily to others. The person who owns the factory might work less hard in physical terms, but they understand something the worker doesn't. They understand how to position themselves to capture value rather than just create it. They understand assets. They understand leverage. They understand systems that generate returns beyond personal labor. This understanding, not superior work ethic, is what produces different outcomes. I know people who work multiple jobs, 60 or 70 hours weekly, and remain perpetually broke. I know people who work reasonable hours and have built substantial wealth. The difference isn't effort quantity, it's effort direction. It's understanding of how wealth actually accumulates versus how income gets earned. Climbing the corporate ladder doesn't solve this problem. The executive earning $500,000 annually is still trading time for money, just at a higher rate. If they stop working, the income stops. They're well-paid employees, not wealthy people. Their lifestyle requires continued labor indefinitely. Wealthy people have structured their finances so income arrives whether they work or not. Their assets generate cash flow. Their investments produce returns. Their businesses operate with or without their daily involvement. This structure, not higher wages, is what creates freedom. Learning to build this structure is the education that traditional paths don't provide. Cultural and family expectations often push people away from wealth-building paths towards stable employment. Many families prioritize security over prosperity. They've seen financial disaster. They've experienced instability. They want their children protected from those experiences. So they guide them toward professions that seem safe: medicine, law, accounting, engineering, government work. These fields offer steady employment, respectable status, and reliable income. Parents who struggled financially see these paths as success for their children. The guidance comes from love. The intention is protection. But the result is often channeling children toward professional employment rather than wealth building. I meet professionals who feel trapped by expectations they absorbed years ago. They became doctors because their parents expected it, not because they felt called to medicine. They became lawyers because the family needed someone in a prestigious profession. They followed scripts written by others and now perform roles that provide income but not fulfillment. These professionals often earn substantial incomes and still feel financially constrained. High salaries come with high expectations for lifestyle. High education comes with high debt from training. High stress comes with high spending to compensate. The professional income that seemed like wealth to parents who earned less turns out to be another form of the middle-class trap, just with bigger numbers. Breaking from cultural expectations requires recognizing them as forces shaping your decisions. Many people never consciously examine why they chose their career path. They followed the momentum of family pressure, community norms, and perceived respectability without considering whether these forces were leading toward what they actually wanted. Entrepreneurship and asset building often seem risky or disreputable to families focused on security. Starting a business means uncertainty. Investing means potential loss. Taking unconventional paths means explaining yourself to relatives who don't understand, but the conventional paths lead to conventional outcomes. If those outcomes include perpetual financial limitation, maybe the conventional guidance deserves questioning. The fundamental difference between wealthy people and everyone else involves focus. Wealthy people focus on acquiring assets and investments. Everyone else focuses on earning income. This distinction seems subtle but produces dramatically different results over time. Income focus asks, how can I earn more money? What job pays better? What promotion increases my salary? How can I work more hours to generate more earnings? Asset focus asks, what can I own that produces money without my time? What generates returns while I sleep? What builds value beyond my personal labor? The income-focused person works harder and earns more. Then they spend more because they've earned more. Their lifestyle expands to absorb available resources. They remain on the same treadmill at higher speed. The asset-focused person might earn less initially, but they direct earnings toward building ownership rather than consumption. Each asset acquired produces additional cash flow. Each investment compounds into larger investment. Over time, the asset base generates more than labor ever could. I watched two former classmates follow these different paths. One became a successful professional earning well into six figures. He bought nice cars, lived in nice houses, took nice vacations. He looked wealthy. He felt constantly stressed about money because expenses matched income perfectly. Any interruption would create crisis. The other started modestly, earning less. But she bought rental property young. She invested consistently in markets. She built a small business on the side. 15 years later, her assets produce more income than her professional employment ever did. She could stop working tomorrow and maintain her lifestyle indefinitely. Same starting point, different focus, completely different outcomes. The belief that you need substantial money to begin building wealth prevents many people from starting. Starting small can lead to wealth over time. You don't need significant capital to begin. You need understanding and action. Investment accounts can be opened with minimal amounts. Index funds can be purchased in small increments. The amount matters less than the behavior. Starting the habit of directing money toward assets rather than consumption changes trajectory regardless of the specific dollar amount. Businesses can be started with almost nothing depending on the type. Service businesses require primarily skill and effort, not capital. Digital businesses require primarily knowledge and time. Not every business requires massive initial investment. The common excuse that you'll start investing when you earn more, or start a business when you have savings, postpones action indefinitely. People who say these things usually find that more income creates more expenses and savings never appear because lifestyle absorbs everything. Starting now with whatever you have teaches lessons that waiting never provides. You learn how investments actually behave. You learn what running a business actually involves. You make small mistakes that teach you how to avoid large mistakes later. The person who invested $50 monthly starting at 22 has a dramatically different position at 45 than the person who waited until they had enough to start. The early starter has years of compound growth and decades of learned behavior. The waiter has good intentions and missed time. Small beginnings compound into large outcomes if you actually begin. Hands-on experience with business teaches financial lessons that no classroom can replicate. Early entrepreneurial ventures, even small or failed ones, reveal how value exchange actually works. You learn what people will pay for. You learn how costs eat into revenue. You learn how pricing affects demand. You learn the difference between working in a business and working on a business. A teenager who runs a lawn mowing operation learns more about business fundamentals than a college student studying business theory. The lawnmower discovers what customers value, how to price services, how to manage time efficiently, how to handle difficult clients. These lessons come through experience, not textbooks. I started small ventures as a young person. Most failed. But each failure taught something that eventual success required. I learned that what I thought customers wanted differed from what they actually wanted. I learned that my time estimates for completing work were optimistic. I learned that cash flow timing matters as much as total revenue. These lessons would have taken years longer to learn through traditional education, if I ever learned them at all. Traditional education might have taught concepts, experience taught reality. The monetary value of those early ventures was minimal. The educational value was enormous. I still draw on lessons learned from enterprises that made almost no money, but taught me nearly everything I needed to know. If you've never tried to sell anything, Never try to build anything customers would pay for. Never experience the direct connection between value creation and income generation. You're missing fundamental financial understanding that employment doesn't provide. Employment teaches you to trade time for money. Entrepreneurship teaches you how money gets created in the first place. Perhaps the most important wealth concept is the distinction between assets and liabilities. Assets are things that put money in your pocket. They generate income. They appreciate in value. They work for you while you do other things. Liabilities are things that take money from your pocket. They require maintenance, they depreciate, they consume resources without generating returns. Wealth is built by acquiring assets and minimizing liabilities. Poverty is created by accumulating liabilities while avoiding assets. This framework sounds simple. Applying it consistently is rare because consumer culture constantly promotes liability acquisition, disguised as asset building. The new car is presented as a smart purchase, but it loses value the moment you drive it away and costs money every month in payments, insurance, and maintenance. It's a liability, not an asset. The boat is presented as an investment in quality of life, but it sits unused most of the time while generating storage fees, maintenance costs, and depreciation. It's a liability pretending to be a luxury asset. The bigger house is presented as building equity, but if you live in it rather than renting it out, it generates no income while creating larger mortgage payments, higher property taxes, greater maintenance costs, and increased utility bills. It might be an asset eventually if appreciation exceeds costs, but while you're paying for it, it's consuming resources. Wealthy people scrutinize potential purchases through this lens. Will this put money in my pocket or take money out? Does this generate return or consume resources? Is this building my financial position or depleting it? Middle-class people make purchases based on desire, status, and what they can technically afford according to financing terms. They accumulate liabilities while believing they're building success because the liabilities look impressive. The person driving the expensive car and living in the big house might have negative net worth when all debts are calculated. The person driving the modest car and living in the smaller place might be quietly accumulating assets that will eventually provide freedom. Appearances deceive. The asset-liability distinction reveals truth. 3 categories of assets drive most wealth creation: real estate, businesses, and stocks. Real estate as investment, distinct from real estate as residence, generates cash flow through rental income, and builds equity through appreciation and debt paydown. A property you rent to others puts money in your pocket monthly. Over time, tenants pay down your mortgage while property value increases. Businesses generate profits that can be extracted or reinvested. A successful business produces returns, far exceeding what employment at that same business would pay. Owners capture value that employees help create but don't share proportionally. Stocks represent ownership in businesses you don't operate yourself. They provide access to business profits without requiring management responsibility. Diversified stock portfolios have historically generated returns that substantially exceed inflation over long periods. Each of these asset classes has specific characteristics, risks, and requirements. Learning about them constitutes the financial education that schools don't provide. Understanding how to acquire, manage, and optimize them is the knowledge that separates wealth builders from mere income earners. The middle-class person saves money in a bank account earning minimal interest that inflation erodes. The wealth builder acquires assets generating returns that outpace inflation and compound over time. One of the most damaging financial misconceptions involves the home you live in. Many people believe their primary residence is their biggest asset. Real estate agents reinforce this. Mortgage lenders reinforce this. The cultural narrative reinforces this. But a home you live in often functions more like a liability than an asset. While you reside there, it generates no income. You pay the mortgage monthly. You pay property taxes annually. You pay for maintenance constantly. You pay for insurance perpetually. These costs flow out while nothing flows in. The equity you build exists only on paper until you sell, and selling means needing somewhere else to live, which often consumes whatever proceeds you gained. The wealth stored in your residence isn't accessible for other purposes unless you borrow against it, which creates additional liability. Compare this to a rental property. The rental generates monthly income that covers or exceeds costs. The equity builds while someone else's rent pays the mortgage. The appreciation benefits you while the property simultaneously produces cash flow. The home you live in might appreciate in value over time, but the costs you paid over that same time often consume much of the appreciation. When you calculate what you put into the house against what you ultimately get out, the investment return is frequently poor compared to alternatives. This doesn't mean never buy a home to live in. Housing provides non-financial value, stability, community, control over your environment. These matter. But understanding that your residence is not building wealth the way actual investment real estate builds wealth prevents the dangerous complacency that home ownership sometimes creates. People who believe their house makes them wealthy stop seeking other assets. They feel financially secure based on illusion. The wealthy own real estate that generates cash flow. The middle class owns homes that generate expenses. The distinction determines financial trajectory. Financial systems are designed by people who understand them for their benefit, not yours. Banks and financial institutions create products that advantage themselves. They understand the mechanics they've designed. Most customers don't. Consider mortgage structure. Traditional mortgages are front-loaded with interest. In early years, most of your payment goes to interest, not principal. The bank collects its profit immediately, while your equity builds slowly. If you sell or refinance after several years, you've paid substantial interest while accumulating minimal equity. The bank got paid. You got a place to live temporarily. The equity you thought you were building is much smaller than your payment history suggests. Understanding this mechanic changes behavior. Strategies exist to accelerate principal paydown. Knowledge of when refinancing makes sense versus when it just restarts the interest front-loading. Awareness of how different loan structures affect total costs over time. Credit cards work similarly. The convenience benefits you slightly. The interest structures benefit issuers enormously. The people who design these products understand human psychology and structured terms to maximize their returns from typical usage patterns. The financially educated navigate these systems with understanding. They use the beneficial features while avoiding the traps. They know what the institutions want and position themselves accordingly. The financially uneducated walk through systems designed by experts without understanding how they work. They use products as presented without recognizing the terms that disadvantage them. They become the customers that institutions profit from most, the ones who don't understand. Banks are not evil. Credit card companies are not conspiring against you. They're simply operating systems they designed for their benefit, while you operate within them without equivalent understanding. The asymmetry produces predictable outcomes. Financial education is the escape route from middle-class limitation. Everything I've described, the absence of financial literacy, the mismatch between traditional education and wealth-building skills, the difference between income focus and asset focus, the distinction between assets and liabilities, the mechanics of wealth building through real estate, business, and stocks. All of this represents knowledge that separates wealth builders from everyone else. This knowledge is available to anyone. It doesn't require expensive credentials or exclusive access. Books exist, resources exist, communities exist. The information that wealthy families pass through generations can be acquired by anyone motivated to learn. The barrier isn't access. The barrier is awareness that the knowledge matters and commitment to acquiring it. Most people sleepwalk through financial life following default patterns they absorbed without examination. They get jobs because that's what you do. They buy houses because that's what you do. They accumulate consumer goods because that's what you do. They save whatever is left over, which is usually nothing. They never stop to question whether the default pattern leads where they want to go. They never investigate alternative approaches. They never realize that the knowledge determining their financial trajectory is something they can learn and change. Waking up to this reality is the first step. Recognizing that your financial outcomes aren't determined by luck or fixed at birth, but by understanding and behavior you can consciously develop. The second step is systematic education. Reading books about investing, business, real estate, and money management. Studying how wealthy people actually built wealth rather than how you imagine they did. Learning the mechanics that schools never taught. The third step is application. Taking the knowledge and putting it into practice. Starting to invest even small amounts. Starting to build business income, even simple ventures. Starting to think about every financial decision through the asset-liability lens. The fourth step is continuation. This isn't a one-time change, but a permanent reorientation. Continual learning, continual application, continual refinement of understanding and behavior. This path doesn't guarantee wealth, Nothing guarantees wealth, but it dramatically increases probability by aligning your behavior with principles that have consistently produced results for others. The middle class trap isn't destiny. It's a pattern that perpetuates when people don't know enough to break it. Learning enough to break it is available to anyone willing to prioritize the learning. My father followed rules that nobody told him to question. He did what he was supposed to do according to the understanding he had. His outcome reflected those rules. I learned different rules, partly from observing his limitations, partly from seeking knowledge he never sought. My trajectory differs from his, not because I work harder, but because I understand differently. The same opportunity for different understanding exists for anyone reading this. Write in the comments what financial knowledge you wish you'd learned earlier. What would have changed your trajectory if you'd understood it sooner? Sometimes articulating the gap helps close it. Share this with someone who seems stuck in patterns they don't know how to break. Someone whose hard work isn't producing the results they deserve. The awareness that different results require different understanding might be exactly what they need to hear. The middle class limitation isn't about income level or job prestige. It's about understanding that doesn't extend to how wealth actually accumulates. Changing that understanding changes what's possible. Education is the escape. Start learning today.